there's a lot of work still to be done. And in terms of planting, in the Midlands, it's probably a lot of or certainly in Central Midlands, a lot of the winter barley that's planned to go in, it probably is in. And the further north you go, there's probably a bit more work done, surprisingly enough, because they missed some of that rain that we would have got, say, 2 weeks ago. So there's quite a bit of work done. In Donegal here, there's even some spraying done, I can see from the fields around me on the way up. Some pre-emerge herbicides have been applied. So they don't seem to have been affected as badly as some places down south.
Farmers are reporting the annual rainfall under farm has been reached already, with more than 2 months to go before the end of the year. Similarly, Met Éireann stations, especially towards the south of the country, are showing above average rainfall for October and for the autumn period, with some now close to the long-term average totals. The incessant rain has had a significant impact on planting, and almost everyone is well behind where they would like to be. You are listening to the latest episode of the Tillage Edge with me, Michael Hennessy. We would really appreciate it if you could listen, follow, and give us a review on Apple or Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast from. Some hard decisions will be made on farms in the coming weeks, revolving around whether to plant cereals or stop altogether. I'm delighted to be joined by Shay Phelan and Ciaran Collins, both tillage specialists in Teagasc, to discuss the state of play at the moment and what are the next steps for farmers. Ciaran, I want to come first to you. Ciaran, you've been in the middle of the recent floods down in Cork, and I suppose farmers are trying to assess the damage that's done. Is there much damage done there? And maybe on the other side of it, how much field work has been completed to date?
Yeah, Michael, I suppose the floods that we saw in Middleton now, especially, it kind of puts things in perspective, in terms of farming, when you see businesses flowing down the street and all the damage that was done to houses and things, I suppose, really. But I suppose from our own side of the house, there's quite a bit of flooding in some fields, obviously. There was a bit of sowing done actually just pre the kind of heavy rain. I don't think it was anticipated that it was going to be as heavy as it was. So you are seeing water lying in some fields and that, However, like in terms of the field work, there's very little done, to be honest with you. It's hard to put an exact figure on it, but just talking to farmers in terms of winter barley, you're entering from none sown to maybe over half of planned area, but it's certainly way back. It's certainly below 50%, probably below 30%, I would think, of maybe what people would have planned. And then on wheat, again, very, very little really, just in that sort, especially in the East Cork area, Now, the only thing is, look, the forecast still isn't great, but, there still is scope to sow, but look, we'll see how the weather comes, I suppose, really.
Well, we might come to that in a little bit. Shay, from your point of view, what are you hearing towards the south and maybe even a little bit further up towards the northeast in terms of damage that's already done or maybe planting that is still to come?
Yeah, we've probably had it a little bit better, Michael, I'd say, than what they've had down the south of the country. Obviously, the storm last week kind of really was at its worst in the south. We didn't seem to get as bad as that. And further up the north, they seem to have missed a lot of the weather in the last couple of weeks, not just last week, but the last couple of weeks. So there's a bit more progress done. That said, there's a lot of work still to be done. And in terms of planting, in the Midlands, it's probably a lot of or certainly in Central Midlands, a lot of the winter barley that's planned to go in, it probably is in. Now, that said, again, depends on the system. Guys who are on reduced cultivation systems did struggle to get going, whereas guys with plough-based systems certainly just went ahead and were able to get drills or get drilling done. And the further north you go, there's probably a bit more work done, surprisingly enough, because they missed some of that rain that we would have got, say, 2 weeks ago. So there's quite a bit of work done. I'm here in Donegal at the moment, and quite a bit of work done up here. In Donegal here, there's even some spraying done, I can see from the fields around me on the way up. Some pre-emerge herbicides have been applied. So they don't seem to have been affected as badly as some places down south.
Okay, but I suppose nonetheless, Shay, you sent me a photograph earlier on where a combine was still in the field trying to salvage kind of what was left, I suppose, there. I suppose there obviously are some crops up in Donegal, but what are you hearing kind of more around the country? Is there still some crops out there and still some farmers who are in trouble?
Yeah, you're right, Michael. I passed by a farmer today salvaging some barley here. And from figures we're hearing from the IFA, there's still, about 100 farmers, they reckon, still have crops to cut, and that's not just up in the north, it's down the south as well. So it's a nationwide thing, if you like, and very localized, I believe, as well. So people along the south coast probably are worse affected than people further north.
And I suppose, look, it's worth saying for anybody who is listening to this, if it's a farmer themselves, or if you see a neighbour in a bit of trouble with that, I mean, I think it's a lot of people are feeling a little bit low, I think, at the moment, and I think it would be a good idea maybe just to call into them, chat with them, see do they need any help in terms of getting that. And I think I know certainly chatting to the IFA, they're working hard to see whether they can get a little bit of overall support going for those farmers. So look, for anybody, I think you kind of need to make some contact, I suppose, and if you're in trouble, you're not the only one, I suppose. Ciaran, can I just come back to you, Ciaran, just in terms of growers that you mentioned before who were planning to get more cereals in, but they're maybe not quite there. So there's seeds still in the shed and waiting for time to plant cereals. Is there still time down your part of the world, do you think?
There is the straight answer, Michael, but obviously it's very dependent on the land drying out. So, land is saturated all over the country now at the moment. So, and we're into the time of year where the days are shorter. So drying really, it takes a long time for land to dry out at this stage. So we're realistically looking into November at this stage. So I think for winter barley, it's probably over for most people, except for those maybe on very light soil. I think that's probably the thing there. Oats, obviously, there still is time, and there certainly is time for wheat as well. I mean, wheat sown in November, the challenges really are that it obviously takes a long time to come up. It can be 4 weeks, if the soil conditions come right, obviously, so that would be so there is still time, but it needs to stop raining and land needs a good bit of time to soak.
And I presume, like, we're really probably talking, Ciaran, at this stage, a kind of a plough-based system, a direct drill or any of the non-inversion kind of systems probably aren't going to be overly suitable. But for any of the systems, and maybe more so focused on the plough-based systems, what sort of adjustment of seed rate would need to happen at this stage?
I think plough one pass is going to be for the vast majority. I would think. I suppose seed rate really is very dependent on soil conditions. So and I'm assuming really that we're mainly talking about wheat at this stage. So you're still targeting to establish maybe 300 plants per square meter in terms of wheat. The seed rate then will really be dependent on A, 1,000 grain weight, and B, field conditions. So like if you take, 1,000 grain weight of 50 grams, you're probably talking somewhere in around 200 kgs per hectare. That's somewhere just maybe around 13 stone per acre in old money, But certainly you'd need to make adjustments for, field conditions. We'd normally kind of do our figures in 85% establishment, but, you could be in the low 70s at this stage. So it's really, the seed rate will really be dependent on field conditions.
And I suppose the other one then around that, you certainly probably maybe a lot of experience in terms of sowing or planting crops kind of up towards the end of October and into November. What about rolling that bit of ground that's been done? Is that something that should be done, or is that a bit of a no-no, or what's your feeling on that?
Probably impractical at this stage, I would think. I'd love to think that soil conditions were dry enough that you could roll. I know that anything that's been sown so far, I think practically none of it has been rolled. So it's very hard. Like wheat generally sown in November never gets rolled really. Well, certainly not in the autumn anyway, if you got a dry spring possibly. So it's not something I'd be planning for anyway. And I suppose the danger of rolling, even sometimes if you think it's dry on the surface, you just get little bits of compaction, especially from the tractor underneath, and you get very poor establishment in the track. So I think it's probably off the table at the moment, Michael, unless things really turn around.
Okay. And Shay, would the same advice hold for growers further up the country?
Very much so, yes, Michael. From what I'm talking to guys, certainly up the country, the drier sites are the ones probably that have been sown so far. So again, the land that's coming up to be sown now, or that's earmarked for sown now, is generally winter wheat land, which tends to be the wetter sites, if you like. And again, like Ciaran said, rolling on those sites now is just not an option.
And what about Shay? There's plenty of crops planted, about 2 weeks now. Probably not up yet. Is there any checking that should be done to those crops by farmers at the moment?
Yeah, definitely, Michael. Hearing a lot of reports of slug damage out there this year, and that's no surprise given the summer and autumn we've had. So again, guys should be out there going around crops looking for the typical symptoms of the shredding of the leaves, and maybe leaves being cut off as they emerge, and in some cases maybe even seed being hollowed out. So certainly they should be on the alert for those, because again, a lot of crops haven't been rolled. So where you have high slug populations and crops that haven't been rolled, you're at a higher risk of having slug damage. So certainly they should be out looking at them.
So Shay, just in terms of rotational slots, is there any particular ones that are more problematic than others, or is it a case that if you had a problem in that field in the past, the chances are you might have a problem in it this year?
Yeah, there is, Michael. I suppose the first crop that you'll be looking at is a winter wheat crop, or after oilseed rape. Is probably number one at the moment. The other one you would actually look at as well is anybody that has planted rye, and there's a lot of talk about damage done to rye crops at the moment. And again, as you say, Michael, the other place we should be kind of cognizant of are fields that have a history of slugs over the last number of years. All those fields should be prioritised, and if they haven't got slug pellets already and you're seeing signs of damage, well, then I'd certainly be addressing the situation.
So are you suggesting, Shay, that even if slug pellets are gone out, that you might go again, or how would you assess that?
And again, I suppose the thing to do in that case, Michael, is to put down your traps and put muesli or whatever it happens to be under the slates or the plastic bags, and go out and count the slug numbers under those. And if you're seeing a number of slugs, 4, 5, 6 slugs under each trap, and set a number of traps across the field. Don't just set one trap, set a number of traps across the field. And if you are seeing a pattern there, even after slug pellets being applied, given all the rain we've had, and you're still seeing slug activity in the field and grazing, then I think it would be be wise to try another application at that stage.
Ciaran, how long would you expect slug pellets to last in a field anyway, once they're applied?
It sort of depends on a number of factors. The makeup of the pellet obviously will be the first thing in the process that's used to make that pellet. But I suppose on the ground, really, you're looking at the weather. They will soak up moisture and dissolve quite quickly. So, it can be a couple of days, it can be a week. It depends on the moisture and on the soil surface. So, like Shay said there, I think it's a case of getting back into the fields, having a look, constantly monitoring that population, getting in there early in the morning when slugs would be grazing, having a look at the numbers. If the pellets are gone, as Shay said, you may need to reapply if you're reaching that threshold in your slug traps.
Ciaran, we mentioned before about the option of kind of going back again, and I suppose just thinking, and maybe pessimistically, I hope not, but where there's very little wheat sown on farms, how much of an option is sowing winter wheat right out into the spring? Is that realistic, do you think?
Yeah, I think it might have to be, because I suppose the important thing to consider is, the seed houses will plan for a set area of winter cereals and spring cereals. And then obviously you get the imbalance when we don't get the planned area sown in the autumn, and then we obviously have a bigger demand for seed in the spring. So it's very likely that spring seed, particularly barley and wheat, will be very, very scarce. So if you have winter wheat in the shed, as we said earlier, sow it away into November, but if the weather does come right, say in January or February, winter wheat is definitely an option. It's something that, one of the department trials this year, one of the recommended list trials was sown there in early February. And, it sort of mirrored the result of the similar trial that was done 10 years earlier, in that there isn't a huge difference between winter and spring varieties when they're sown in the very early part of the spring. So I'm saying, the end of January into sort of mid-February. What you tend to get then after that you tend to get higher yields than from the spring varieties, So I wouldn't be concerned about sowing a winter wheat variety in January or for most of February, but you'd ideally have it in for, say, the middle of February, and you will get that tapering of yield then, and certainly you'd be more in favour of a spring variety after that. I suppose, again, it's important to remember you're looking at faster developing varieties. So maybe, look, we're very limited at the moment, but maybe Graham, for argument's sake, might have a slight advantage over Dawson in that scenario.
Okay. And then I suppose the other side of that, Ciaran, is where a lot of the winter barley mightn't maybe go in because, as you say, it's probably a little bit late. Is there any sort of concern if that's just going to switch into spring barley at all, or is there anything people should be thinking about?
Yeah, I think there is really. I suppose, like I said already, seed may possibly be limited. And then when seed is limited, you might be looking at imported seed. And, I suppose I'd be very cautious about that because we have really good checks and controls here in terms of grass weeds, in terms of weed seeds in our cereal seed by the Department of Ag here. The level, the tolerance wouldn't be as high in terms of some of the imported seeds. So it's certainly one thing that would sort of concern me. I would definitely max out on high value crops like malting barley, firstly. But the other one is beans. I mean, we saw a big increase in the area of beans last year as a result of the wet autumn, and I suppose there is that, just to remember, like, there is that sort of guaranteed payment, the protein payment that's there. Obviously will fluctuate depending on the area sown, but it is very attractive. And like we were saying last year, look, it's something that's going to be there regardless of the yield of the crop. So I think if an opportunity came in the very early part of the spring, I think beans certainly would be an option if there's a slot available on the farm for them,
Okay, so keep thinking and keep planning, I suppose, really. Shay, a final one for you. I suppose, look, there's plenty of weather, I think, coming as well over the next few days. And farmers might be looking as regards other things that they might be planning on the farm. Is there anything else that farmers should really be thinking about at the moment?
Yeah, look, Michael, I suppose one of the things that you can do at this time of year is, when farmers are filling out nutrient management plans, I mean, they have to have up-to-date soil samples for those nutrient management plans. And that's not just for regulation, Michael, it's also for, good advice in terms of applying fertilizers. We all know how expensive fertilizers are now. And although they have come back, they're still one of the top 3 costs of growing crops. So having up-to-date soil samples should help to reduce down the financial aspect of nutrient management. The other things, as you said, Mike, or as Ciaran said, in terms of spring crops, one thing people need to be cognizant of when they're planning this year, and there's a bit of planning can be done now, is that the 2 and 3 crop rule will be implemented again next year. So people need to be cognizant of that 2 and 3 crop rule, and they need to make sure that they have a plan in place to plant other crops. Like Ciaran said, beans are an option, maybe spring wheat, spring oats, whatever else it might be, maybe even winter wheat, as Ciaran said already, because there's no guarantee that there'll be a derogation from that 2 and 3 crop rule next year. So they have to have some plan in place that when they get into spring, they have a cropping plan for the farm.
Okay, thanks very much, Shay, and thanks very much, Ciaran. Look, all we can do is fingers crossed that we do get a little bit of weather and we get more of those winter crops planted in the next week or 10 days. Thanks very much, guys, again.
Thanks, Michael.
So that's it for this week, and a huge thanks to Shay and Ciaran for joining me on the show. Just a reminder again, an event for your diary is the Teagasc ECT Grass Week Conference, which takes place in the Killishy Hotel on November the 8th at 10:30 a.m. The event will delve into the increasing problem of grass weeds on Irish tillage farms, including blackgrass, herbicide-resistant wild oats, ryegrass and more. We will also hear from a number of farmers who've been working with the ECT project over the past 5 years. So finally, don't forget, if you enjoyed the podcast, then recommend it to a friend or colleague. And as always, rate, review and follow on Apple or Spotify so you never miss an episode. And for more information, go to teagasc.ie. I'm Michael Hennessy, thanks for listening, and I'll be back next week with more tillage news and advice.